Welcome back, everybody, to Magic with Randy. I am Randy, and as always, guys, if you like what you're seeing, you like what I'm doing, go ahead and leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything that I'm doing. But let's get down into the standard metagames, shall we? As always, we're starting off with Friday. The challenge here, we had Dimir topping out with 6 copies in the top 32. No surprise, that's been the most played deck here for a while now. The big talk of this weekend, though, is the Esper Temple deck. I'll go over that here in a little bit. But it is a deck that kind of popped up out of nowhere and is doing relatively well. It put 4 copies into the top 32. That's not nothing to sneeze at. It also put some copies in other challenges as well, so we'll go over that. Mono Red, Gruul Prowess, Boros Aggro, putting 4 copies each. Aggro is alive and well. I keep telling people this. As Aggro seems to kind of fall off in the sense of it doesn't seem like it's always doing the best, and then it just pops right back up because people either aren't prepared for it, or even when they're prepared for it, it still is just crushing decks. It's crazy how well and prevalent this deck, or I shouldn't say this deck, but the archetype is doing, essentially the red aggressive decks. Golgari midrange only putting up 2 copies. My, how the mighty have fallen. This used to be, Dimir, Golgari, everything else. And now it's Dimir, Golgari. So we've definitely fallen far with our Golgari brother here, only putting 2 copies compared to 6 with Dimir. Azorius Convoke putting up 2, and then a couple different 1-ups as well in the top 32. That being said, though, Gruul did end up winning the challenge. We're kind of going back full circle with the Gruul decks here. So when Standard first started, or with the RCs first starting out and stuff, the aggro deck to beat was this Gruul Innkeeper's Talent deck. And then as we kept progressing on, Innkeeper's Talent kept getting fewer and fewer copies. We were seeing these decks to where it was getting cut out completely. And now we've kind of come full circle, putting 4 copies into the main deck again. Also playing Questing Druid as every other green card because it's just good card value, card advantage. And then another interesting fact too is we've kind of cut away all the burn spells. Essentially, we're only running 3 Burst Lightning in this list at 1. Then we're playing 1 Torch the Tower, 2 Witchstalker Frenzies, and 1 Scorching Shot. Just ways to remove creatures and let our creatures punch through. Essentially, also they started picking up this Soulstone Sanctuary. One day I'll learn how to spell that card correctly, but it's another value card for this deck. Notably, they're not playing the red-green manland, they're just playing this colorless manland. Notably also too, this is all creature types when you make it into a creature, so it does help you, like with the Manifold Mouse. It can trigger to give it double strike or trample. Same thing with the Rockface Village. You can use that to pump your 3/3 to turn it into a 4/3. Just little value things here. So this kind of cool as a whole. And then nothing too, special here in the sideboard. Running another one of the manlands in the sideboard here for those more grindy games where you're expecting to go long and you need the creatures to handle their board wipes and their multiple spot removal spells. So nothing too crazy in that sense. But yeah, we keep thinking that aggro is gonna maybe die down. These mid-range decks, things are gonna figure out how to just beat them consistently, and they still keep popping up over and over again. That being said, the new kid on the block here, this Esper Tempo deck. So it's one of these, this town ain't big enough, Storm Chaser Talent decks, essentially. We've had the blue-green decks, we've had the Bant decks, we had the Sultai decks, we had the 4-color decks, and now we're on to Esper. So biggest difference here, obviously you don't get to play Up the Beanstalk, which is kind of one of the big draws to those decks. Instead, you're kind of working off an Optimistic Scavengers package / bounce package for Hopeless Nightmare. The 1 black enchantment, when it enters battlefield, each opponent discards a card and loses 2 life. So kind of a little interesting thing there. So you're kind of hoping just to keep bouncing that back and forth. You also have Nowhere to Run is a good removal spell because you keep bouncing that, killing things. You have Shelter by Ghosts, of course. And then so you have, Nurturing Pixie, which lets you bounce a non-land permanent, or I think it's a non-pixie, non-land permanent as well. So you can play Nurturing Pixie, bounce your Hopeless Nightmare. Pixie's now a 2/2. Optimistic Scavenger, whenever you play an enchantment enters, the Hopeless Nightmare keeps, triggering on that. We're playing Mockingbird to copy our low drop creatures. We're also playing Fear of Isolation, which is part of its cost. You have to return a non-land permanent, so you get to bounce your Hopeless Nightmares, your Nowhere to Runs, things like that. Just all this intrinsic value that you have going on. That being said, I do kind of wonder if this is not just maybe a worse version than what we've seen with the Dimir midrange. I kind of think about that with, they're playing Kaidos now. So the decks I've seen, or the versions I've seen of this deck, widely varies, kind of like how Dimir is, where there's no set 60 at all. And it's kind of the same thing with here, where I've seen up to 3 Kaidos getting played. I've seen Enduring Curiosity, the 4-mana flash 4/3 creature, seeing play in these lists as well. So it's all kind of like interesting to see how good this deck really is. If it's just maybe a worse version of, if it's just a worse version, excuse me, of the Dimir mid-range deck. If it's maybe a worse version than the other, Sultai and Bant versions we've seen of, this town ain't big enough type tempo decks. Time will tell. Notably, this doesn't have like the big creature aspect of it either. You're kind of really hoping to rely on like chip damage and Hopeless Nightmare to do your job, as to where the other decks are relying on Tolarian Terror and Eddie Murkrab to tap your opponent's creatures down, punch in for 5 damage at a time, trigger your Beanstalks, get all that kind of value going. So it'd be interesting to see if this is a flash in the pan from this weekend, kind of a breakout deck, or if it's here to stay and it's going to be part of the metagame moving forward. Only time's going to tell on that, obviously, but let's keep getting into it. So we also had a standard super qualifier as well, with Dimir Midrange putting up 7 copies, Esper Tempo putting up 5, Rule putting up 5, Boros Aggro putting up 4, Azorius Convoke putting up 3, Azorius Tempo putting up 2. That's the Oculus deck, in case you guys forgot about that one, and a couple of different one-ofs as well. So once again, Dimir Midrange still, topping the charts with putting 7 copies in, but Aggro's right behind it, and that Esper Tempo is right behind it too, which is kind of big for the deck to just come out, right? It's like Esper Tempo is a deck that kind of like broke out this last weekend, so it's interesting to see it putting up so many copies so fast. Because usually we'll see these decks kind of break out, or like we'll see these decks start getting played, it looks like all 1 or 2 copies making it into the top 32s, and we're seeing 4 and now 5 copies. So clearly the deck is at least either somewhat powerful or doing something that people weren't expecting. So we'll have to see how the metagame adjusts afterwards. After this deck has now been found, is it so good now that people know about it, or is it just this flash in the pan? Once again, only time's going to tell on that. Mono Red still did win the tournament, so once again the red aggressive deck's winning. Biggest thing here is this deck has also started playing the Soulstone Sanctuary, putting 3 copies into it. Not too surprising there. Playing a little bit more burn as a whole than what we saw from the last one. We're playing 4 Burst Lightning, 4 Lightning Strikes as our burn spells here. And then nothing too surprising as far as the sideboard go. It's nice to see the Case of the Crimson Pulse getting played. I think that's something these decks kind of needed. That little bit of push to have a little bit more card advantage, card quality going forward. But pretty much your stereotypical red deck wins. Nothing too fancy, nothing too crazy to write home about there. Moving on to 1228 here on the Standard Challenge. Golgari Midrange finally showed up, putting 7 copies into the top 32. Dimir Midrange back with 5, Azorius Convoke with 3, Jeskai Convoke with 3, Boros Aggro with 3, Gruul Aggro with 2, Sultai Tempo with 2, and then a bunch of different one-ofs. So Golgari Midrange reminding people that it does still see play, despite the fact that it is a lot less prevalent than what we've seen in Dimir Midrange here in these last few weeks. Golgari was keeping up, and it seems like Golgari has kind of dropped off more so than the Dimir. But we'll see how that moves forward. I do think Dimir is probably a better quality deck to move forward with if you're trying to play one of the mid-range decks over Golgari, but that's just my personal opinion. Obviously, I could be wrong. I'm not saying I have the end-all be-all of information from Magic by any stretch of the imagination. That being said, though, Golgari did end up winning the tournament. Kind of a little bit different build in the sense of this one was running, 3 Sheoldreds, kind of like the... Going back to more of the default plane of Sheoldred's a good card. We're seeing Deep Cavern Bats come back. That card has kind of been on the downtick for a long time now. It's almost a more traditional style build, if you will. We're playing Sheoldreds. We're playing no demons. So the only way for our Unholy Amex not to hurt us is either, with Sheoldred to negate the life loss, or making a demon on the other half with the Ritual Chamber. Running 2 Maelstrom Pulses, a Gix command in the main deck. And really cutting down on the Anoint with Afflictions here, with deciding to have 4 cut down, 4 go for the throat, and 1 anoint. And then everything else is pretty much standard stock. Playing Soulstone Sanctuary as well, along with the Restless Cottage. Really kind of valuing on our man lands here to get the extra push in with our lands. Nothing too crazy, like I said, to be said about this entire deck as a whole. Notably, they have 2 blotouts, which I have to imagine is for the Sultai, Sultai and Bant decks. I will say that the Golgari list seems to kind of really struggle against those up the beanstalk tempo decks. As someone who has played these up the beanstalk tempo decks, the Bant 4-color Bant 4-color and Sultai builds, I will say that Golgari's kind of felt like a very good just almost auto win against them. So excuse me, having the Maelstrom Pulses seemed good against that deck, having the blotouts in the sideboard, kind of acknowledging that like that deck is a thing and that they need to be worried about it as a whole. Not too surprising there. And then, just a bunch of the others, like 1-ofs in the sideboard. Terra Thunder is obviously good there for the enchantments and stuff running around, so nothing too crazy to write about. The biggest thing here, though, is that they're playing 4 Shieldreds, and we're kind of seeing, I think we're going to see Golgari kind of move back towards the Shieldred plan, because Shieldred's just a good card. I don't have much more to say about that. There's a reason why she's been, $70 pretty much since the beginning of time that she's been in Standard, so I don't see that card going down anytime soon. That being said, we had the second challenge then here on Saturday. Dimir Midrange once again topping out with 7 copies. Golgari with 6. Golgari still showcasing that it is getting played. Rule Aggro with 4. Azorius Convoke with 3. Mono Red with 3. The Esper Temple deck still putting up 2 copies. Domain with 2, and then a couple different 1-ofs there. Nothing too spectacular to write about here, but once again, Dimir putting up the numbers. Golgari trying to keep up again. But like I said, we saw a couple of different challenges where we didn't see any Golgari basically. So Dimir is still probably the most prevalent mid-range deck running around right now. That being said, though, Golgari did win the challenge yet again. This one was doing something a little bit special. This is something we kind of seen before. Thrun, Breaker of Silence is coming back. Coming back is definitely not the right word. Thrun, Breaker of Silence is being played, is what I should say. And it makes sense. It can't be countered. It has trample. It can't be the target of non-green spells your opponents control. And on your turn, it has indestructible. This card is a menace to deal with. I say that as someone who's had to play against this card playing the Tempo deck. It is hard to deal with Thrun when you can't target it. Makes sense. But this deck was definitely relying heavily on playing 2 Thruns, 3 Shieldreds again, playing Preacher. This one playing none of the Unholy Annex at all, so just kind of valuing its more value-based effect. Playing 2 Gix Command in the main, that's a little bit bigger. Trying to go a little bit bigger essentially as a deck. You can kind of see it with, like I said, the Preachers, the 2 Thruns, just doing a bigger thing than what most of the Golgari lists have been doing. I kind of like where this is going. I still like the 2 Maelstrom Pulses in the main. The 1 Terra Thunder seems a little interesting. This one did decide to play 2 Anoint with Afflictions, though, instead. Playing 1 of the end as well, just playing a lot more removal, a lot more of going bigger and better than what your opponent's going to be doing essentially. So kind of interesting to see as a different little take. Even with the sideboard, you see him go bigger, with the 4 Harvest of Misery, Jesus, and 2 of the Nissas as well. The 7 mana Nissa. So definitely going bigger than what your opponent's going to be doing is what this deck game plan was trying to do. And I gotta say I like it. I like seeing Thrun. I think it's just very hard to answer in the metagame right now. And at the very worst, it's a 5 mana 5/5. That's really good even against the red decks. That's a lot of damage and back end to deal through. They're trading 2 cards usually for 1 to deal with this Thrun. Like, I'm okay with that if I'm trying to prolong the game out longer. So definitely seems like maybe where Golgari wants to be moving forward. And then we did have the Standard Challenge on Sunday as well, with Dimir Midrange putting up 8 copies. Esper Tempo with 7, kind of huge, it's right there with it. Gruul Aggro with 5, Boros with 4, Golgari with only 2, Caretakers with 2, Mono Red with 2, and then Azorius Convoke and Domain to round it out as our 2 1-ofs decks showing up in there. So once again, Esper Tempo, still showing up strong. This was a breakout weekend for it, putting up a lot of copies in these top 32, top 64 type decks or type tournaments. That being said, Dimir did finally end up winning one. Nothing too crazy from what we've seen from normal Dimir. Still, numbers are being thrown around. There's no set 60 for this deck at all. Notably, this deck was running 2 spell setters as a counter spells and 3 Flame Bloom Trick That's the one that makes 2 fairies and taps down for 3 mana. Kind of a good little thing going on if you're expecting, you know, bigger creatures, things like that from your opponents, being able to tap them down, always good. Also running 1 Sheoldred's Edict in the main, along with 1 Nowhere to Run. We kind of see these Nowhere to Run starting to pop up. I think it's because of the tempo decks we've been seeing with Bant, Sultai, Blue Green, those type of decks where they have the Tolarian Terror and they're hard. That's a hard card to deal with. You know, if it gets to get cast out as early as like turn 3. Happy to have 4 mana to deal with something is really annoying as a whole. You know, your Go for the Throat's costing 4 mana instead of 2. Huge deal. Kaido's 0 ability, or sorry, -2 ability, also costing 2 mana. There's all these things are, you know, adds up as well. So not too crazy there. Also running the 1 Thassa's Tidebinder in the main, kind of a little different. Sideboard, nothing too crazy to speak of. You know, 2 Sheoldreds, 2 Gix's Command, 1 Blot Out. Again, I think the Blot Out is there for the tempo decks that are starting to run around to pick up steam, as well as it's also a good one to take out for the Thruns that are seeing play in Golgari, clearly. So, you know, nothing too crazy there with this deck, and nothing too surprising as a whole, but, you know, this is kind of the meta as a whole. And speaking of the meta, you know, we are getting ready to go into that Spotlight Challenge here in Atlanta, or not here in Atlanta, but in Atlanta this coming weekend when you guys are watching this. So it'll be interesting to see what takes over, what does well in Standard, especially with all the different prizes they have available. You know it's gonna be a big tournament. They got covers for everything. So if you can't go to, I definitely suggest trying to watch the covers, kind of keep up with what's going on with the metagame. I'm pretty sure that we're gonna see we're gonna see a variety of decks. I think that Dimir is probably gonna be one of the most played decks. It's either gonna be Dimir or some red aggressive deck variant. So it's either gonna be Boros, Gruul, Mono Red's gonna be one of the biggest decks there. And I'm hoping that we're gonna see, you know, some upsets, some new builds possibly. I'm hoping it's not just gonna be, you know, Dimir showcasing that it's the best deck in the format. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think you can very easily register just about any deck you want that's doing well and take down a challenge. I'm curious to see if this is where we'll see Caretaker's Talent come back up and that deck start to do something. It's kind of been on the downswing, but I think it's in a very good position as a whole. So I'm very interested to see what decks are going to take over, what decks are going to do well. As always, guys, if you like what I'm doing, you like what you're seeing, go ahead and leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think is going to take down Atlanta. Love to hear from you guys. I'll catch you guys next time.